Do I think Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a better movie than Avengers Infinity War or Black Panther? Maybe. On the one hand, I figured I'd get my stance on that issue out of the way ASAP, but on the other hand, I doubt many of you found that answer satisfying. The thing about comparing Spider-Verse to the other best-received superhero films this year, even though I'll inevitably have to do that when I rank the superhero outings of 2018 like I did for 2017, is that it's such a wholly unique creature unlike anything else in the genre that it's almost unfair to pit it against two films which are vastly similar, yet vastly different to it in so many ways. Keep in mind that for me, saying Spider-Verse is even on par with those two movies still makes it one of the best comic book movies ever made, and easily the best Spider-Man film in my opinion. Infinity War and Black Panther were movies that I had a more powerful experience with in the theater, but the more I sit with this one, the more and more its brilliant composition comes into stark relief. At the time of writing this review, I've seen the film and read the screenplay, which I'll link in the description for those interested. And let me just say that sitting in the aftermath of this movie, it is on almost every level kind of a miracle. In a lot of ways, Miles Morales feels exactly like a younger version of myself. He has trouble figuring out who he is, and as a result has grown used to other people's expectations laying out a track for his life. He's gotten so used to this that he's grown disenfranchised and unconfident in his own ability to choose things for himself, or do much of anything. It's to the point that one of the few things in his life that Miles can control is the state of his shoelaces. He's adrift, and outside of the supporting hand of his Uncle Aaron, he feels completely alone. He does have another figure to look up to, though, as does seemingly everyone in this movie's take on New York City, that being the one and only Spider-Man. As just about anyone who's watched the marketing knows, our friendly neighborhood Peter Parker doesn't stay one and only for very long. As an experiment by the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk ends up unleashing an entire horde of Spider's folk into Miles' version of reality. Having a whole gang of Spider-Men would seemingly make taking down Kingpin's machinations easy, but the dimensional rift that brought them all here is also going to tear apart the fabric of reality all around Brooklyn. And when the dimensional breakage ends up bringing in one of the experimental spiders from another dimension to bite Miles himself, the kid has to go from fanboy to sidekick to full-fledged Spider-Man all on his own, in order to save not just his reality, but also his new friends. The sheer eclectic nature of this movie's cultural and pop cultural voice is inspired. In a way, it's almost like watching the first Avengers again, but on steroids, in terms of the seemingly unprecedented mix of elements of plot and setting, visual and musical styles, etc. This is a coming-of-age story about a kid just coming into his teens, living in an incredibly grounded and true-to-life Brooklyn, exuding his urban Afro-Latina background and influence just as his family are so clearly products of city life in decades past, while also heavily featuring not one but two fully formed, note-perfect versions of quote-unquote classic Peter Parker, Elseworld-style spins on well-known and obscure Spidey villains alike, a main antagonist who's a cartoonishly caricatured but still tragic take on a mob boss, most well-known as the villain in everybody's favorite cancelled Netflix show, variations on a character appealing to fans of Looney Tunes, kawaii anime schoolgirls, mecha, punk, and classic noir, with an album full of original tracks ranging from trap to R&B, not to mention one of the most creative orchestral scores to be heard in a superhero movie maybe ever, with unique and maybe at times unprecedented instrumentation, and tons of distinct leitmotifs for its individual characters. All of that on top of a deft mix of comedy and pathos that could only possibly come from the guys who have been giving us stuff like the Lego Movie and Clone High for years, working in a genre as absurdly tragic and tragically absurd as superhero stories. As if all of that weren't enough, it also manages to be a metatextual exploration of the meaning and impact of one of the most popular fictional characters of all time. If even 10 years ago I told you that a movie with all of those things in it was possible, let alone that it would feel like a cohesive vision, you'd look at me funny. And yet that's exactly what we have. And the reason that it feels so cohesive is the same thing that's made superhero stories compelling since their inception. And that's having all of the disparate genre elements and cultural identifiers grounded by a strong central character arc. Miles is a kid with all the instincts of a hero. His first reaction in most any situation is to do the right thing, and yet at the same time he's got a kind of conditioned fear that stops him from being what he could be, or from following through on those instincts for most of the movie. Miles runs away a lot. He's not someone who tries when the going gets tough. He stops himself from helping his universe's Peter in their first encounter. He chickens out of jumping off of a tall building in order to train his newfound Spidey powers. He He's reluctant to web swing for the first time, and he generally caves to the pressures of his father and school life. Over the course of the movie, it's repeatedly hammered in just how much Miles has a penchant for running away from conflict, and as a result, he relies way too much on other people to give him purpose or direction. Of course, the thing about life is that nobody's perfect and everyone has their own issues, and it's in eventually growing to be his own person, to face his own fears and his own problems his own way, that Miles is able to help both his family and his newfound spider family get past their own assorted issues with commitment and running away from things. I'm not going to go into any spoilers over the course of this video because that would just be mean, but I don't think I'm giving away too much when I say that it's only when Miles stops running that he's able to teach someone like, say, Spider-Gwen to stop running from friendships as a result of her own tragic backstory, or to teach someone like the doughy, middle-aged Peter B. Parker to stop running from his own relationships and all of the things waiting for him in his own dimension that Peter himself just finds it too hard to deal with. Miles' arc alone makes him plenty compelling and gives the movie a lot of focus and direction, but on top of that, the potentially annoying character trait of being a bit of a chicken is also nicely compensated for by the fact that Miles is just a really likable kid. He's smart, he's clever, he's charming when he's not trying, and really hilariously awkward when he is trying, a charm that I dare say rests on Shameik Moore's brilliant performance more than anything. There's no moment throughout this movie where Miles doesn't feel like the 13 to 14-year-old kid that he is. He's kinda scatterbrained, and even when he's being clever, it's not in that weird adults writing for children but they only really know how to write for adults kind of clever. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that this movie's take on Miles Morales is bound to make you a fan of him, if other incarnations, including his original Ultimate Comics counterpart, never really did it for you. As previously mentioned, we also get two versions of Peter Parker, each of whom appeal nicely to those who love Pete as either cool, top of his game if slightly beleaguered Golden Boy Spider-Man, or average Joe, kinda moody and bitter universal punching bag Spider-Man, played respectively by Chris Pine and Jake Johnston. There's a difficult to describe quality to the two actors' voices, where they really do feel like they're playing two different versions of the same person, and how the movie utilizes both of these characters to highlight the complexity and sadness of the man, but also their inner strength and boundless potential for humor and relatability it's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant! Haley Steinfeld plays Gwen, a Spider-Girl who only barely beats out Miles for age, but dwarfs him in experience. I was a bit worried going into this movie that this character would be stuck playing the less fun straight man to the lead guys, but Gwen is a fun presence and has tons of chemistry with everyone, but Miles especially. And also, anyone who's remotely familiar with Spider-Gwen already will already agree with me when I say this, but come on, look at this costume design. How brilliant is that? Miles' dad Jefferson and his uncle Aaron have a great nuanced dynamic both with each other and Miles, which are really the movie's most important relationships, and are in completely different ways charming and funny while still able to get deadly serious when the time calls for it, being a cop and a not cop, respectively. Liev Schreiber's take on a much less faux, gentile, much more openly thuggish version of Wilson Fisk is also plenty of fun for the scenes that he's in, and the handling of his motivation for this whole dimensional wormhole malarkey is probably one of the best scenes in the movie. There's another big villain character who I could talk about, but I won't dare spoil them for you here, especially since Sony was actually smart for once and didn't bother to put them in any of the marketing. Seriously, this is a studio that somehow managed to make one of the official clips that it released online the very last scene of this film, and yet even they knew that the punch of finding out who this villain was so good that they had to edit them out of all of the promo materials. If I think there's one significant though not nearly game-breaking issue with the cast, and really the film as a whole, it's that the anime-inspired Penny Parker, Looney Tunes-esque Spider-Ham, and old-timey Spider-Noir don't really have enough to do for my taste. Outside of a broad thematic angle, the three of them don't really contribute much to anything. Captain Logan of Geekvolution made a good point in his spoiler cast about the movie when he said that it feels like behind the scenes they might have possibly been worried that these guys would take over the spotlight, and so overcompensated by limiting their presence to the point where now it feels like there was a bit of a missed opportunity to not do more with them. Like with certain players in Infinity War, it took me a minute to come to terms with just how tertiary these three actually were, screen presence and plot-wise. There's also a moment with Penny toward the end that goes for emotional, but is really just more confusing than anything else. And keep in mind that all of these things bothered me less on a second viewing than they did the first, though that might have just been because I went into it with more of an idea of what to expect. Trust me, I don't want to dissuade anyone from seeing this movie for any reason, but I feel it's only fair to warn you. If you're going into it for one of those three characters, then you're going to want to savor all of the little morsels of them that you get, because there's really not all that much. I will say though, the fact that Penny Parker uses Heelys, adorable and hilarious. I've mentioned this already, but the original soundtrack for this movie and Daniel Pemberton's score are pitch perfect and are probably going to be stuck in my head for months. Trust me when I say that you have never heard an animated movie that sounds like this one. The film also gets points for knowing exactly when to cut off a track so the moment isn't ruined by Lil Wayne. Good job, movie. That and the stellar, magnificent script aside, the visual storytelling on display through the animation is amazing. So many shots are packed to the brim with meaning, setup, and payoff, you name it. I love the Peanuts movie-esque use of 2D elements and lines on 3D modeled faces, and the unique art styles of Penny, Spider-Ham, and Noir are adequately trippy without ever being distracting. There's also some visual elements of the film that make for a nice bait and switch, which I'd be tempted to say were unintentional, but really can't be sure knowing this creative team. When we first see the spider that ends up biting Miles, for instance, there's a bit of visualization that I thought was purely non-diegetic for the sake of the audience, but what ends up actually being a diegetic plot point. The single aspect of the film where the visuals maybe could have been handled better is the fight scenes featuring all of the Spider's folk fighting together. You'd figure animation would lend even more freedom to teams of heroes fighting than live action, but in both the big fights where all of our heroes are together scrapping, it gets a tad hard to follow, and they're cut in such a way that, once again, our more tertiary heroes get very little spotlight to actually show off their mad skills. Honestly though, what I've mentioned so far is already all of the problems that I can think of having with this movie, and comparatively, it's all peanuts, man. Look, do you guys want to give me a Christmas gift? That's great, because I want to give you one too. How's about you give us both a gift and go out and see Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in theaters? There are few words that I can think of to describe this movie other than powerful and transcendent. It's the movie that lets us all know that Andrew Garfield got it right. About what it means to be Spider-Man, to be someone for whom superpowers don't actually make life easier. Someone who has to take hard punches and suffer, and sometimes stray from the path, but still in the end do what's right and not run when things get hard. It's the essence of why superheroes matter, why if we can all just be each other's Spider-Man, Black, Latino, white, Asian, male, female, young, old, whatever. If we can all be the person who does what we should do, who does the selfless thing even if it sucks, then none of us ever have to feel alone. Is Into the Spider-Verse a better movie than Infinity War or Black Panther? Maybe. But more than those movies, more than any movie in a long time, it's a reminder of what superheroes are all about, what they should be, and where their real power comes from. That this movie gets released next to a box office this competitive is a crime, and you're abetting that crime if you haven't already paid money to see it. If you want to hear me talk spoilers, come back to the channel sometime later in the week. But for right now, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to me, and you owe it to everyone who worked on this amazing, glorious, beautiful passion project to go see this film.